Good morning. We represent the Dine Community Development Corporation. We were certified by the Navajo Nation IRS 501c3, incorporated 2018. Mr. Lorenzo J. Begay is the intern director, myself, Ms. Laverne Begay Todicini, project director, and Ms. Melanie Yazzie, our accountant. Our mission statement is to provide leadership and resource development that enhances and vitalizes our rural surrounding communities such as Navajo, Native Americans, and underserved populations. Our vision statement indicates we'll lead as a recognized leader, economic and community development, and will promote self-sufficiency to achieve excellence for Native American communities. Program and services DCDC provides are COVID-19, agriculture, business, and financial resources, feasibility study and business plan development, nonprofit development and incorporation, Indianpreneurship and financial literacy workshops, board governance training and workshops, cooperative development, strategic planning sessions, grant development and proposal writing, identification of federal, state, nonprofit, and tribal funding and grants. The Net Food Sovereignty Program our program is taking control of food on the Navajo Nation to promote health, economics, and self-sufficiency by working with Navajo farmers and gardeners. We decided to come up with 3 series in terms of webinar, YouTube, Facebook, to do online virtual cooking, gardening workshops to educate our Navajo farmers and gardeners. The first one is to be released July 30th, 2020, Navajo Food Sovereignty Introduction, and that will be by Mr. Brandon Francis. On September 30, 2020, Navajo Food Sovereignty Demonstration, which will be provided by Jennifer Jackson Wheeler. And on November 30th, 2020, Navajo Food Sovereignty Initiative by Sherilyn Yazzie out of Delcon, Arizona. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Melanie Yazzie to go over the NAF, Native American Agriculture Fund, which is our funder right now.
Okay, good morning. My name is Melanie Yazzie, and I help the Dine Community Development Corporation with their accounting, so I'm their accountant. I'm going to go ahead and go over the slides for the Native American Agricultural Fund, who is our funder, the food sovereignty, and Janie Hipp is the CEO for the Native American Agricultural Fund. Native American Agricultural Fund is the largest philanthropic organization solely devoted to serving the Native American community. NAF is a 20-year private charity trust that will be in existence until September 2038. The mission of the NAF is to provide grant funding in the following areas: business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy. The NAF is allowed by the terms of its trust agreement to fund the following types of eligible entities: 501c3 organizations, CDFIs, educational organization, state or federally recognized tribal government. What is tribal food sovereignty? Prior to European contact, Native communities thrived on ancient food systems. Through careful management of natural resources and agricultural practice, well-balanced diets enriched with nutrients were maintained. In return, so was the health of the people. During colonization, relationship with the land and knowledge systems were served and became increasingly challenged. As a result, tribal communities are now and remain among the most food insecure in the country. Food sovereignty is defined as the inherent right of a people to define their own diet and therefore shape of their own food system. Good food is essential to healthy, strong tribal nations having enough food to eat. Food security is just one element of food sovereignty. Involves controlling and managing all the factors that contribute to a sustainable food system, environmental assets, economic assets, and cultural assets, and more. Communities that exhibit tribal food sustainability and food sovereignty as those that have access to healthy food, have access to foods that are culturally appropriate, grow, gather, hunt, and fish in ways that are maintainable over the long term, distribute foods in ways that ensure and improve health among communities, adequately compensate the people who provide the food, and utilize tribal treaty rights and uphold policies that ensure continued access to tribal or traditional food.
Okay, food sovereignty and food justice are important issues to our nonprofit corporation. So we'll go ahead and start off the introduction of food sovereignty by Mr. Brandon Francis. Mr. Francis was born and raised in Black Mesa, Arizona. 2014, New Mexico State University Agriculture Science Center in Farmington, New Mexico. He's a research lab technician and education resource coordinator. His interests are how gardening affected participants, diet, and exercise. He built background gardens for participants on the Navajo Nation. He was involved in 3 studies during the Gold King mine spill of 2005, monitoring health of farms. A current research project is Diego Gardening, which teaches elementary students, and the project reconnects our youth with the net culture ties to education and agriculture. Here is Mr. Brandon Francis.
J. Brandon William Francis Nisha, not oten etachini ishla, do totsoni bashichin, torchini dasche, kilachini dashanella, shachine a hopaha, I see jitli jane that nasha, with bilashla ishla. Thanks for the nice introductions, Laverne and Melanie. Appreciate this opportunity to talk about this subject of food sovereignty, and thank you.
Okay, Brandon, thank you for being here with us. I'm going to go ahead and ask the first couple of questions, and I'll go ahead and give it back to Melanie with the next 2. Okay, Brandon, what is food sovereignty?
Food sovereignty. I think you gave a good covering of the topic, and I think it's not a one size fits all question. It's different for different tribes, and it's a very touchy subject. And I've talked about it many times with many different people, from the university level to the scientific level to the community level, and you'll get 100 different answers to this question, and not all of them are wrong. It's just, how do we as individual people, how do we as clan people, as family members, as community members, as members of chapters, and as members of different districts among the Navajo Nation, how do we answer this? And there's no single answer to say, oh, this is what food sovereignty is, because food sovereignty in the San Juan County or San Juan River Valley could be different than people living on Black Mesa, because they have different access to different food needs. But food sovereignty is being able to be rest assured that you know that you're going to eat, you know your children are going to eat, and even your great-grandchildren who are unborn yet, knowing that they will eat, and knowing that they will eat in the same way that their ancestors and your great-grandparents taught them, because they instilled us with strength and knowledge to survive, because we've thrived and lived in this region for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's that knowledge that we have to pass on, and it's full of strength, and it's full of stories, it's full of prayers and songs. So when we talk about our food, we're talking about our history. So that's why if we teach people that growing and sacred knowledge about the landscape, that food is everywhere, but somewhere along those lines we become disconnected with it. So when we actually reconnect with our food, it's actually reconnecting with our history, and it's actually reconnecting with our health, and that's very, very important.
Okay, my next question is, with the onset of COVID-19, many people have looked at farming as necessary. What are your thoughts on this as it relates to food sovereignty?
how the pandemic has opened up a lot of eyes, has opened up people's perception of how weak our food system actually is. And when people have to wait in line and worry about where their food's coming from, it creates a kind of uneasiness. So a lot of people, not just people in the Navajo Nation, but worldwide, they found that they get some reassurance when they actually grow their own food. So when in the very beginning of the pandemic, everyone went out and went and bought seeds. So there was a big seed shortage, and you couldn't find seeds anywhere on the shelf. And people, I mentioned the disconnect with agriculture earlier. They had no idea about when to plant corn or how to grow new crops like lettuce, leafy greens, and stuff that Navajo people are traditionally unfamiliar with. But there was such an interest in people wanting to grow, wanting to reconnect with that part of our heritage, that it was a good thing. And if we keep this interest and this flame alive, I think now's the opportunity, despite all the hard and worry that people are going. Part of our efforts that we did was um, my wife, she received a NAPI grant last year to help the community, but she was helping the Navajo Prep Community Garden by Navajo Prep, and the dorm in Aztec where Navajo students stay, Kinkiel. She was helping them build a garden and using that funds to help them build a garden. And as an extension of that, we she helped people, elderly people. We grew them squash buckets and we gave them tomato plants and eggplants and chili peppers, just as a part because we want elderly people, when they actually have stuff in their within their reach and within their yards, they actually um, they actually get some comfort from that. So that was our way of helping people. And I was building up a seed bank of corn these last couple of years. So I gave away a lot of our seeds, our squash seeds and our melon seeds, and we gave away a lot of tomato plants, because tomato plants are one of those tricky plants that if you don't start them right, they'll be very, very tricky to grow. But the interest in growing is one of those good things that have come out of this pandemic, and realizing that you can get healthy food from your garden. And but then there's all these other unforeseen things, like how do I access healthy water? Is my soil healthy enough? And all these different things came up.
Okay. What health benefits will Dine receive from participating in food sovereignty?
Um, one of the as a scientist, I'm always interested in statistics and numbers. And one of the sad statistics is that um, 1/3 of all Navajo people are diabetic, and another 1/3 are pre-diabetic. So having access to a garden or a field, and having access to food, and being able to work that garden and work that field actually helps you in terms of exercise and not only having food. One of my initial studies I started on was a backyard garden study, in which over in Arizona there was 15 backyard gardens, and here in New Mexico there was 15 backyard gardens that we built just to see its effect on people's behavior in terms of healthy eating, in terms of exercise, and it was a success. And it was a it was a 25 by 35-foot garden. We set up fencing, we set up drip tape, we did everything short of planting and weeding for them. We gave them everything that they could do to succeed. And all the people that succeeded, they one of the main complaints that they had about these gardens was that they grew too much. And that's a good thing. Like, they didn't know what to do with all this abundance that came out of their garden. So then, not only that when their family members, when they actually saw that they were growing stuff, their kids, their grandkids, they became involved and they wanted to be a part of it. And so it drew the whole family in. And one of the incentives, or one of the only stipulations that we had for people becoming a part of this project was they had to be disconnected, like a generation, or they had to be new gardeners. They couldn't be experienced gardeners. So these people, they had little to no knowledge about farming, and they picked it up, and with the assistance that we provided, they loved it, and they still continue to grow to this day. And that's what I remind me that's one study that we need to replicate and see if we get the same results. But the results were amazing.
Okay, thank you. Navajos were farmers decades ago. Why did they stop farming, and how did that have an impact on their health?
I actually wrote this as a part of my thesis, and I actually wrote about the history of the San Juan River Valley, and the history of agriculture in this region is very, very rich. And I always tell people that it goes back thousands, if not hundreds of years. And the agriculture has collapsed in this region 3 or 4 times, depending on if you look into the ancient Puebloan times, the people we call the Anasazi people. And then when we came into this river valley, the San Juan River Valley, when I was writing my thesis, I went into old Spanish and French explorer journals and read about when they first came into contact with Navajo people and people living in this area. And in the French journals, that they marveled at how industrious we are, and how we worked land that seemed like was very, very not suited for agriculture. But they noted that every ditch and every wash in this region was filled with cornfields, was filled with melon fields, was filled with beans and squash, and they marveled at about how well that this region, the San Juan River Valley, was producing, but despite the arid conditions. And they also made note that people that used to live here before, like in the area, and the recent collapse of the people that were kind of like a decline, not just on the Navajo side, but on the people living further upriver. The interest in agriculture has been on decline, not only regionally, nationally, but worldwide. People are not farming anymore. Another organization I'm involved with is called the National Young Farmers Coalition, and they did a study. I think it was in 2014. They did a survey nationwide, and they said that the average age of the average farmer nationwide in the United States is 59 years old. So 5 out of 6 farmers are 59 years old, and the other 1 out of 6 farmers is in their 30s. So somewhere along the line, right now, 2 generations have been skipped over. But in our prehistory, when we came in contact with the American or the Bilaganas, they sent us on the long walk, and they put us back on the reservation, and that kind of led to a decline in agriculture in this region, because they wanted us to become farmers, but they also took away our pastoral or transhumanist way of life of traveling from a summer camp to a winter camp. So they reduced our land size, so we couldn't plant in the way that we used to, and we couldn't use the same lifestyle that we're used to. And they also introduced government assistance, which they would bring us supplies. And they also burnt a lot of our orchards and a lot of our cornfields down. So, and a lot of that sacred knowledge was lost during that time period. So it slowly built back up, but that was the reason of the most recent decline in agriculture in the region was the Navajo decline, when we used to farm this whole valley. And its effect on health, it had a big impact, as I mentioned earlier, with diabetes, with obesity, and so we really need to reconnect with that knowledge of our ancestors.
Okay, my next question, Mr. Francis, is why is food important and why should the Navajo Nation critically examine and rebuild a self-sufficient food system for the Dine people?
I always like to give this example of it's very hard. I know everyone likes to go to the store and they like to buy quinoa, but our people, the Bilagana people, their bodies weren't made to digest it. It's not in their genetics for them to digest that type of food. But for us as indigenous people, wheat and all this new type of food, it's very hard for our bodies to digest that type of food. But when we eat corn, when we eat squash, um, our bodies are genetically predisposed to actually digest it, and it digests it better. And there's a Navajo word, I think it's called a chun. Like when you eat that type of food, when you crave it on a like a on a I don't know, like a spiritual level. When you eat that first harvest of corn, you know, your body like feels re-energized. And so when we like look at it as a whole, um, the food system was also broken because it broke those bonds of kinship, those bonds of that used to exist a long time ago. And when I give presentations all over the res, I give presentations to all the way from the university level down to kindergartners, and the kindergartners seem to pick this up even faster when I give this example. A long time ago, the Navajo people used to grow 4 types of fields. They used to grow a big field, like not the size up here on Nappy, but they used to call the Doc Esnes. Like it used to be a giant cornfield. It used to be in a rectangle shape, and sometimes it used to go for miles, like cornfields, squash, everything. And that's what the community, like people that lived in that local area, that's what they used to plant and weed. So when it came harvest time, all the people in the local area, they would come and get it and take their share of it. And that was called a community field, or dog esnas. And the other type of field was a square field, and it wasn't a big field like the big acres and acres of cornfield, but it was a small field, maybe the size of maybe a quarter acre. And that's what a husband and wife, that's what they used to grow for themselves near their hogan. And that was for their small household, their small family that they were raising. And then the other cornfield, that other type field they used to grow, was a circular field, and it used to spiral out from the center. They used to grow it like a spiral, planting out in that direction. And that field, they actually grew for their mother. They planted that field in honor of her, because by that time she'd be getting up there in age, and she would be able to help out in the big field or even have her own personal field. And a long time ago, and I'm sure everybody knows about this, but the cornfield is kind of where you learned about life, and where you learned, it was the original Dine classroom, where you learned a lot of things about how things work in the world. And a lot of time was spent there as a child. So in honor of all that knowledge that your mother gave you, you grew this field, and when it came time to harvest, you gave all that abundance that came from it. You gave it to her in honor of all that knowledge and that gift of life that she gave you. So that's what they used to grow for their mother. And then that fourth field that they used to grow was a triangle field, and that triangle field was always pointed toward the rising sun, and that's where you grew your offering, like what you were gonna make offerings with, either your cornmeal or your medicinal plants. So every morning before the sun rose, you would go out there, and that's where you would pray with your tadadine and your cornmeal, and that was the triangle field. And so that those are just the small little things that we used to do like a long time ago that have been lost over time. But in the big field, I think that sense of kinship needs to come back. We need to re-examine, like, we need to grow, have more community fields. And a lot of communities are doing this right now, especially ones that have access to water. And that's the critical thing about growing, is it's water intensive. And that's why 75% of the Navajos that grow in the Navajo Nation, they grow along the San Juan River Valley because they have access to that water. And one of the things that the Navajo government and chapter officials need to know is that if they want to start any agricultural endeavor, is number one is have a clean source of water. And because a lot of people, they say, "Oh, I'm watering my plants," but they don't seem to be doing well. And the fastest way to run up your water bill is actually to water with NTUA water. So we need to find a way where we can rebuild those bonds of kinship and say this water is for watering our fields, and how can we get back into that, where we help each other as neighbors and say, I want to grow, but I don't have access to a tractor. How do I can you plow for me, and I'll give you some corn in return. And so if we rebuild these like basic concepts of and kinship, where we help one another, and I think that it'll be mutually beneficial. So that's why we need because it wasn't just an individual agriculture, it was a community effort. So that's one way I think we can examine the agricultural systems we got now, is how do we help people, and how do we rebuild those bonds of kinship that just don't exist between clan members, but also that exist with the earth and with the water and with the animals. Because when we start growing again, as my late mentor, he always told me that Dr. Larry Emerson, he always said that when you plant a seed, when you plant corn, you're making a sacred pact that you're gonna love all things, no matter how small, no matter how big. As a corn planter, you're making a sacred pact between the heaven and the earth to be a person that's gonna look after everything. So, and that's what we need to reinstill with our youth and reinstill with our community members, that planting is a sacred duty, and that's what we need to tell people, that we're carrying on a sacred duty that our ancestors gave to us.
Okay, my next question, Brandon, is you touched on this already. How many communities within the Navajo Nation have community farms?
I was trying to research. I've always looked out for how many communities are doing this, and a lot of them, like over in Kayenta and Den Hotel area, they have community farms, but they have broken dam systems. I recently talked to an engineer, and they built a bunch of dams in the 50s and 60s, but these dams that they built are unoperational now. So to have access to water is very hard. So Kayenta has a farm board. I know Ganado, they have access to water, and there's the San Juan farm board. And how many people have access to a river? And that's a very, very good question. But yeah, Kayenta is building a community farm. It's not in operation this year, but that's going back to the how do we get community members involved.
Okay. What are some challenges and barriers to growing?
Oh, this is one of those questions where you could talk for hours, because um, when you get back into farming and gardening, the initial investment, like depending on on the size of your scale of your operation that you want to get back into, that initial investment is always very high because if you want to plow acres, you're gonna have to get a tractor. Because I've tried this before, and when I was in college, when I was learning sustainable agriculture and how to not add so many amendments like chemicals and pesticides, and how to use less fossil fuels. I when I worked a quarter acre and I tilled it all by hand, and that was the last time I did that because it was so hard. And I realized doing it by yourself is very, very hard. But once you get your operation going, um, every dollar that you invest, whether it be in your garden or your farm, you're going to get $6 back. But that it's just not like putting money in a stock. You have to take care of it. You have to watch it. You have to water it. You have to know, like, and that's why I always stress to people, if you're going to get back into gardening or farming, you always start small. Learn about your plants. Watch them when they're growing. Watch them when they're under stress. Know when they need water, because there's a fine line between underwatering and overwatering. And when you start small, you can actually learn these things. And there's 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 all sorts of things that go into farming and gardening. The difference between a farmer and a gardener is scale. A gardener works less than an acre. A farmer works more than an acre. So I always recommend to people, start small. I know everyone was like, oh, I remember like a long time ago, my grandparents had acres and acres of corn, and that just didn't happen overnight. That happened over years and years of practice, and they worked with their community and they helped out their community, so they had those bonds of kinship connected, and they had everybody come, because once the harvest starts coming, it doesn't stop. Like you're going to be harvesting, especially with like plants like squash and tomatoes. Once those kick in, you're going to have a lot. But like the initial part is hard because you have planting, you have watering, and in the backyard garden study, the major problem we found was access to water. People didn't want to go to the poorhouse paying for municipal water. And so what we did was we went in there and we set up rain catchment systems so that they every time it rained, that they would have access to water. So access to water was the number one problem that people ran into, and that was especially evident during the 2015 Gold King mine spill. Was when all the irrigation ditches from Durango all the way into Enid, they shut down. And for 2 weeks, people were debating whether they, after this spill in August 5th, in 2015, they were debating whether they should open these irrigation ditches because they could see their plants. They're obviously suffering and withering in the heat. So people had to go find out, is there an alternate source of water instead of the irrigation ditches? So a lot of people went to go check their well water and tapped into their well water, and they found out that, oh wow, the well water has actually is actually worse than the river water, and this is then they were barely finding out these things, and so they had to make redundancy plans. Like I always like to tell people, have a plan Z in case one of your sources of water shuts off. But sources of water, sources of seed, because if you want good seed, you're going to want it from people who have grown for years. And that's another thing, is how do we recreate these seed networks? How do we recreate these access to traditional plants that were grown? And so that's another problem. But then once it gets going, it's easy to maintain. But the hard part is planting, watering, and I know people have a hard time, but weeding and managing them. And so those are some of the challenges and barriers to growing is access to, to indigenous plants.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, why is culture so important in analyzing the Navajo food system and their benefits in preparing the ground for farming coincide with the prayers for rain in the summertime?
I always tell people that when they asking when I give presentations, like I gave presentations in at MIT and in Washington, and people always ask why is agriculture so important to the Nez people, and I always go back into our creation stories as Navajo people that we were made from two ears of corn. We were made from a white corn and a yellow corn, and we're the holy people, the Dine they actually prayed over us and sang over us. So we are prayer and song given physical form, and and when you tell people that who aren't familiar with our culture, they see it, they recognize that, oh, it's actually part of your mythology, and then going back to why it's important is because it's so ingrained in our life. If we lose that connection with the corn pollen, with the tetadine, we actually lose a big part of our culture. And if we can't pray in the morning, we can't connect with the holy people. That's a big part of our culture. When my mom, when she was first going to school, she always likes to remind me this. She's like, I wanted to study agriculture because even back in the early '80s, she recognized that agriculture was on the decline. But then she realized that because our language was also in danger, so she decided to study bilingual education and early childhood development because she believed like that's when you get people to have an interest in language and have interest in things. And so one of the big problems that people run into when farming is, when do I plant? When do I lay down seed? And our ancestors, they were master scientists. They were so in tune with their environment that they knew the name of every plant out in the field, out in the out, even when they were walking. They knew the name of every water source, every hill, every animal. And you ask someone that, if you go on a walk with them, like, what's the name of this plant? What's its uses? And and maybe you could name three. But our ancestors, they knew the name of every one of them, and they also knew the stars. They also knew the cloud formations, the animal signs, the bird signs, and they would plant with what's called Dilye or Pleiades, and whenever it's only visible in the fall and winter. So when this star cluster disappears from the night sky, that's when Navajo people used to plant a long time ago, and they would never plant before that. And the reason that they used to plant like that was if you planted during that time in May, sometimes April, it comes on different times of years because it's our calendar is not based on the lunar cycle. It's based on I think it's based on the Gregorian calendar. But if you plant in May and sometimes early April, um, you, they knew that if they planted then, when the corn was tasseling, like around now, like around this time, and the monsoons were coming, that's when the corn and the other plants, when they're flowering and when they're tasseling, that's when they actually need more water. So they're actually like had knowledge about things like that. So that's why they used to plant like that, and they planted very differently. Um, they used to use a planting stick because they didn't believe in in digging up the earth or disturbing the earth, and that's a different story. But they used to use a planting stick, and they used to plant deep, like 8 inches deep, and they actually had in these old journals that I came across, they used to observe how Navajo people were practicing agriculture, and they thought it was a form of witchcraft, like what they were doing. But nowadays they call it biodynamic farming. They're actually very, very smart, and so that's why Navajo, or that's why culture is so important, because it's a part of our lives, and it's a part of our mythology and our stories, and it's actually, and it actually coincides with a lot of science. Like,
My next question is, how do traditional food plants play a part of spirituality and wellness?
a lot of the plants, like I was mentioning, we've lost. Very few people know their names anymore, or actually even their uses. And even with things like chilchin and gut, um, they have a lot of nutrition if you harvest it right and prepare it right. And and going back to your traditional diet, um, they actually, Navajo people, they used to have what's called childitchkin, you know, because the food that we grow now, we can't eat it right away. We can't eat the squash. I mean, the squash is coming in now, and the tomatoes are coming in now, but there's like a 2 month gap where there's no food available. So the Navajos, they had the Navajo people, the Pueblo people, the ancestral Pueblo people. They had to know which food was available out there. So there was chasteji, wild carrots, you know, and wild parsley, things that they could eat that were coming into season, like during this food gap. So even those foods, they're full of nutrition, and then there's even Psyllium jamesi, which is the Southwest potato or Four Corners potato, and that has actually been eaten and harvested in this region for 10,000 years. And it's one of the, where I work at the Agricultural Science Center, we actually have some that we grow, and but it's just that knowledge, like I was saying, when you go out and you're looking for food and food's available and it's out there, and when you actually show people that, or when I go into the classroom, I say, well, where does this apple come from? Where does this tomato come from? Half the kids will say that came from the store. You know, they've lost connection with, oh, it comes from this tree. You know, it comes from this plant. And when you show them that they can actually, when you show kids and you show people that, oh, you can grow those things, and as young kids, they actually love it. They actually like, one time during the Gold King Mine School, this is a perfect story. Over at the Dream to Net Charter School, where our pilot project was started, the Yego Gardening, the kids were so in tune with their garden that they knew every individual chili plant that was out there, like that was growing in tomato plant. And one time we let someone come in a few of the plants, you know, just a few. She wanted to make a salad, and the next Monday, when the kids came back, they're like, my tomato's gone, the one that was on this plant right here. So they had such a connection with that, with even individual plants. It was so amazing. So that's why it's so important, right? And it's so important to have connection, because when we actually grow food and we actually grow corn, they become a part of our family. So when we're watering, we actually no sex, you know, grow. So when during those 2 weeks in the Gold King mine spill, people were seeing their members wither and die. It was so hard for them. It wasn't just something, an economic impact. It was a spiritual impact. Watching their family members wither and die in the field, and they had to make that hard choice of whether to water their plants with this heavy metal laden water, but they didn't want to water their plants with this heavy metal laden water because to them, if they watered their plants with contaminated water, it would be a form of domestic violence. It'd be like a form of abuse that they would be committing against a family member. So that's a deep connection we have with the things that we grow. And that's one of the reasons that we need to reconnect, because if we reconnect on that level, we can reconnect with each other. We can reconnect with the water, with the earth, and all the different systems that are involved, the hydraulic system, the geologic system, the ecosystem, and realize that we're all connected and we're all interconnected and we all rely on each other. We're in symbiosis.
How does food preparation assist the people in the area of nutrition?
When people prepare their own food that they've grown and it comes from their field and doesn't have to travel very far, that they have to go pick themselves, because once food is picked, it immediately begins to lose nutrients. Its nutrient levels drop. So the closer that they are to their food, and the more nutritious they'll be. And I always give this example is of blue corn. Blue corn is very, very sacred to us. And very recently, scientists have found out that blue corn actually has antithyacins, which is actually an anti-cancer. It fights free radicals in our body. But a long time ago, when we made pushteen or blue corn mush, we actually, when someone was having a ceremony or someone was praying for them, we actually used to feed blue corn mush to our medicine men to give them strength again. So it's stuff like that, like stuff that we eat, like blue corn mush, is actually healthier for us than something we would get from the store, because our bodies over time have adapted to eat these foods, and preparing them is not easy. If you made tidikuo before, and it's actually a long process. You actually have to get down on your knees and put it in the ground. You actually have to grind it up, and our ancestors were very, very fit, not only from diet, but from all the work and love that they put into their food. So in that way, growing your own food, you're not only getting exercise, you're getting access to healthy food, which is expensive, and that's one of the things that we face is if you go to the grocery store, vegetables aren't cheap. Organic vegetables are very expensive, but if you can actually produce that in your backyard, you're saving yourself money, and you're healing your family at the same time, and you're healing your community, and you're showing your kids that hard work has its benefits.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Francis. I want to thank Melanie for being here. Do you have any closing remarks, Mr. Francis?
Um, I I just like to encourage everybody. Like I mentioned before, I wrote my thesis on the history of the San Juan River Valley, going back thousands of years, um, from a glottochronological record to the dendrochronological record, and showing how systems have collapsed numerous times. But we as indigenous people have survived these events. Back in the 11th century and the 13th century, um, dendrochronology is just tree ring dating, and because we didn't have any ways of monitoring the weather or climate back then, So when you look at these tree rings, the further they are apart, the more moisture that the tree got during that time period. And the closer they are, the drier the climate was back then. And so during those time periods, there was a 70 and 90-year drought that our ancestors lived through. And it led to the collapse of the ancient Puebloan people that used to live here at Aztec ruins and over in Chaco. They couldn't survive those events. And right now, we're in the middle of a 21-year drought. So kids that are in school right now, they have never seen a rainy period. My kids have never seen a rainy period. And that's something we got to prepare for. But our ancestors went through events like that. And they went through the long walk. They went through the various periods of colonialism with the Spanish and Mexicans. But we survived those events. And we survived those events because we had connection with our food and we knew where our food came from and we knew how to prepare them. But we didn't have a Walmart, we didn't have a McDonald's on every corner. We had to grow these things and we had to have patience and we had to have perseverance and we relied on each other as a community. And we developed these bonds of kinship, not just with each other, but with the earth, the plants, and with the water, with the sky. And we realized that we were just not we were a part of a bigger system. And I always like to tell this story, either at the beginning or end. And in the second world, there was only, because this was before people were made, when the planting laws were first implemented, and it was the animals and the birds who made the planting laws, and because they were going through a period of starvation as well. They didn't have any food, and so they decided that to send 4 animals out into each of the directions to go look for the best source of food. And as they were arguing, the birds, Titty, they came over and they saw the animals. They were having a big discussion, and they wanted to be a part of it. So they said, the birds said, we want to be part of this because whichever animal brought back the best source of food, Aiden and Natani told that going to be our leader, you know. So the birds, they wanted to be part of this discussion. So the animals, the animals that walk on the earth, the Natloshi, they chose bobcat and badger as their representatives. And the birds, they chose hummingbird and bluebird as their representatives. And their instructions were to go for 4 days and come back and bring back the best source of food you can. And whoever brings back the best food, that person will be leader of all the animals. So they let them go off in the directions. Bobcat, he went to the east. Bluebird, he went to the south. Badger, he went to the west, and Hummingbird went to the north. And the people, they waited there 4 days, and they were really excited. And at dawn of the 4th day, Bobcat was running back really fast and came back. And Bobcat brought back white corn. And everybody was really, really excited, you know. And they were like, oh, this is the best food, and this will sustain all the animals. And they wanted to make him leader, like right then and then. And then the birds are like, no, wait, let's wait for some more of the representatives to come back. So when it was midday and the sky was the bluest, Bluebird came out of the south, and he flew up and he brought blue corn. And everybody loved it, and it was like, So everyone was like, oh, let's make him the leader. Blue corn is the best. And that's when I tell the medicine man part of the story. Like, this is what we use our blue corn for. This is how we prepare it with gut, And then they kept arguing. No, let's wait. And then when the sun was the hottest in the afternoon, and Badger came up, and Badger brought yellow corn. And yellow corn is very sweet corn, and it's the female corn, and that's what everyone makes the Navajo kinata cakes and out of, and because it's so sweet. And everyone wanted to make him the leader because he brought back something very, very delicious. And everyone's like, no, we gotta wait for Hummingbird. He's coming back. But then everyone's like, no, he's so little. He's not gonna be able to bring anything back. And right when the sun was about to set and getting dark, he came back, and he brought back Nadantas A, multicolored corn, squash, and all the different types of seeds. But then everyone decided, everyone brought back great gifts. So that's when they made the planting laws that they were always going to have a cornfield. You're always going to have a cornfield with squash and melons and everything. You're going to always have a grinding stone as well. And they're always going to pray with Tadadin. But eventually they forgot these laws. But before they forgot, the animals forgot these laws, they passed it on to us. So that's why we have to be thankful to the animals and everybody, because they're the original people that taught us these things. And don't always put people out, even though they're small, is the moral of the story. Everyone has something to contribute. And if we all work together, we can all contribute. We can all eat healthy, and we can all not worry about where our food's going to come from. And our food is full of history, and it's full of knowledge. And if we reconnect, we can pass this on, and we can survive whatever event comes along in the future. Go ahead.
Once again, thank you, Mr. Francis. This will conclude our session in terms of introduction to Navajo food sovereignty. The Community Development Corporation would like to thank you for being here. And pretty much our vision in terms of food sovereignty is food can be medicine or traditional food. And by going back to our roots and teaching our youth, I think we'll be able to come out of the obstacles that we're going through on the Navajo Nation. So, yeah, Ole.